Okay, I gotta talk about Haliburton. Numbers are down, efficiency's way down, the Pacers' offense is worse, their pace is worse, their transition stuff is worse. They've had injuries, and I do think teams, the way they're guarding them, are like a little more ready for what the Pacers are this year, but regardless, we gotta start with Haliburton. So, Haliburton has had 2 games this year where he's popped off. He's had a few games where it's been okay, and he has had way too many games where it is like, oh, this is concerning, especially his last one against the Rockets, not long ago against the Magic. The one against the Raptors also was pretty bad. The Pacers did score 119 against the Raptors, but the Raptors also had a million turnovers, so therefore the Pacers had way more shot attempts. And these are just within the last 5 games, mind you. And really, it's a lack of burst, a lack of aggressiveness around screens, not challenging centers and confident one-on-ones on switches, stuff like that. Before I go any further, there is a belief within Pacers Internet that he is playing through a back injury. It's mostly still contained to like Pacers Twitter, Pacers Reddit, stuff like that. There has been no official anything from the team or from him about this, but if this ended up being true, I would not be surprised. I mean, I would like to believe that the hamstring injury from last season is now fully past him, but I don't know. I don't know how else you explain how electric he looked, especially in the first chunk of last season, to what he now looks like, where he is hesitant and he is not be able to beat guys off the dribble. I mean, the amount of plays I have seen in the last few games where, like, he's trying to drive on Jalen Suggs, or Fred VanVleet in the Rockets game, or Abaji or Davion Mitchell in the Raptors game, and he is just passing out of opportunities where if it's not going to be a score at the rim, at the least it would be an extra step into the paint, which results in more rotations and then an easier kick out to whether it's Mathurin or Siakam, or easier passes to Turner. They have been pretty injured. They don't have Nembhard or Nesmith right now, and that definitely matters. He's also had a number of concerning plays where he just can't get by his guy enough to really get to the rim, so he settles for some blah pull-up too. And mind you, these are just the times when he's actually attacking. There's a lot of times where he's just kind of floating around the perimeter. And, well, let me say first, I think the way the teams are guarding Haliburton and the Pacers has become a little more aggressive this season. So, in the Raptors game, Davion Mitchell, for the most part, a little bit of Abaji, a little bit of Jamal Shed, were picking Haliburton up pretty much basically full court. In the Rockets game, Fred was making sure that he was on him right around when Haliburton crossed half court. Similar thing with the Magic, with Jalen Suggs, KCP. And then also in the Rockets game, he had some stretches where he had to deal with Ahmed and Tari on the floor, and I mean, nobody's having fun dealing with those two right now. The Rockets did also have Jabari on Miles to where they could switch Haliburton and Miles Turner screens, which then resulted in Quentin Jackson getting a bunch of buckets on Şengün, if you care. So okay, teams are pressuring him more, forcing the Pacers just to play a little slower, which I do think matters with their pace numbers. Their transition numbers are down. I do also think because they're just not a good defensive rebounding team, that also can hurt because you just can't get out and run as much, or maybe you get the rebound, but the ball's bouncing around a little bit before you get it, stuff like that. As far as the Haliburton floating around the perimeter stuff, maybe I'm just not remembering this right, but it felt like last season with the Pacers, among many of the things that they did on offense that just ran teams out of the gym, between the hit-ahead passes, the running off of makes, and just the constant drive and kick, quick little ghost screens, and all that. It felt like another thing was Haliburton, besides just being better, was also able to find himself in plays more often, even if the ball wasn't in his hands for that particular thing. Obviously, he brings the ball up a lot now still like he did last year, but it felt like last year he'd be flowing into more like handoff actions or relocating or maybe setting a ghost screen himself or just whatever, finding a way to get back in the play, even if the ball was in like Nembhard or TJ McConnell's hands, Siakam's as well, stuff like that. Whereas it feels like this season, if the ball's not in his hands in the half court, a lot of the time, it just never finds him again. Now, I do think it's possible that Nembhard not being here plays into that somewhat. You know, Nembhard really is like the second guy in that whole Pacers offensive ecosystem, you know, which is keeping the ball zipping around and everything, even if Siakam is the second leading scorer. I know Nembhard wasn't shooting well to open the season, even so I think he's still very important for them on both sides of the floor. He and Nesmith, I mean, if you want an explanation for their defense, I mean, there was already questions about if they could be a good defensive team, and they've been without Nesmith and Nembhard, so I think that's the story on that side of the ball. So yeah, that's the gist. I mean, throughout the last few games that I've looked at for this vid, the only stretches where Haliburton's had anything exciting going on, like he had back-to-back threes off the dribble in the Magic game that were kind of cool, and then not long after that, he tried to take Jett Howard off the dribble, and he kind of had the angle on him, but then Jonathan Isaac showed an ounce of being potentially the help guy, and that was enough for Haliburton to be like, nope, I'm getting out of this, and he immediately kicks it to the corner. It's way too early. Nothing happens on the play. I remember a similar play in the Rockets game where Jock Landale is dropping back on a screen action, and Haliburton, he's got what I would think is an opportunity to maybe challenge him at the rim, anything. Instead, it's a very early pass to the corner. Tari had it telegraphed the whole time. Turnover, we're going the other way. Again, if you told me that he was playing through an injury right now, it would not surprise me because I don't know how else you explain what Haliburton looks like right now. Sure, he's always been a pass-first guy who sometimes leaned a little too much into not inviting contact, stuff like that. All that is fair, it never looked like this. As far as other general Pacer things, I mean, like Matherin's getting buckets. I feel like it's more so out of necessity, but I mean, we knew Matherin could score. Even so, there is still that culture clash of how Matherin wants to play, which is a little more like holding onto the ball, let me cook, and how the Pacers want to play, which is the ball moving around more. And I mean, they're second in passes per game, which is pretty aligned with last season for them, but even so, it just doesn't look as good. But of course, that's mostly because Haliburton is just not the same guy, and that's the centerpiece of this whole thing. And also, Siakam has been very good.